part of that too is our freshman class. I mean, a lot of times you worry about freshmen coming in and how well do they adjust, whether they got here in January or whether they got here at the end of May. And regardless of when they got here, our freshman class has been fantastic as far as what they've done as well to contribute to this team in a short period of time. And we're going to need a lot of them on the field this summer as well. But our guys got back here Memorial Day night, and we had a team meeting that night and started workouts the very next morning. And we've gotten better as a football team. There's no doubt in my mind this summer.
All right. Welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. And that was Shane Beamer yesterday at the South Carolina Media Days, which open up fall camp. We saw a little bit of the first 7 periods of the first practice of fall camp this morning. I'm sure we got tons of insight on that. And yeah, I mean, it's here. We made it. It's August 4th.
Yep.
There will be a football game played in under 30 days between South Carolina and North Carolina. And we're going to start to break down what the season's looking like, what the team's looking like at this point, injury updates, all those fun things. But before we get to that, let's talk about recruiting, because that's also pretty fun right now.
Been a pretty big week for that too, yeah.
So we did not do the podcast last week. I was on vacation, trying to get one more in before the grind really started. But I did post the weekly recruiting wrap-up on GamecockTube.com, as I do every week. So make sure you're subscribed there so that you can get that insight. And if you saw that last week, you saw the big list of Cookout visitors, including 5-star Dylan Stewart, also including 4-star Jalewis Solomon, who makes his announcement tomorrow. So keep your eyes out for that one. And then a big list of 2025 and 2026 players, including Elijah Griffin, who is the #1 overall recruit in the Rivals rankings out of Savannah, Georgia. It's another edge player that South Carolina, I mean, seems to have some staying power with, has some early momentum with for sure. But not to bury the lead, Tuesday, coming out of the Cookout weekend, Dylan Stewart surprised everyone and went ahead and made his announcement public. We knew it was coming at some point before his senior season began. Chose South Carolina. Really can't overstate how big of an impact that was. Also, that was following up Sunday's announcement by Zamarian Lang, who's rated a 4-star on Rivals. He's classified as an athlete, but he'll probably start at wide receiver once he arrives on campus at South Carolina. So after a pretty slow summer from a recruiting standpoint, you get those 4- and 5-star back-to-back to inject some momentum back into this process. I believe they jumped from like 40th to 27th in the team rankings. And if you filter by average stars, they're actually in the top 10 at this point, which, yeah, the team rankings perhaps are not the clearest indicator at this point, because it seems clear to us that South Carolina is going to take a smaller than normal class. It's sitting at, 15 commits right now?
15, you had 24 last year, yeah.
Yeah, probably won't hit that 24 number this year. I think that's somewhat intentional to leave some flexibility in the transfer portal and all of that. And they've been just a little bit more, this isn't to say anything about the quality of the players in previous classes or anything like that, but I think they've been a little bit more choosy. And if they don't land the top guy at the position that they want, they haven't necessarily gone down just to fill a hole there. So yeah, most of the recruits so far are 4 or 5 stars, and really more than you would even think, because you have a punter in Mason Love, who obviously is going to be a 3-star on Rivals, but he's a 5-star on kicking services. So really this class is coming together in a major way, and obviously Dylan Stewart does a lot for that. I know some South Carolina fans are going to be disappointed in the way the wide receiver recruiting has gone. Keelan Adams, you missed out on earlier in July. Jonathan Paylor is set to announce later today. And if you check out what I've said about that recently on GamecockScoop.com, I'm not feeling particularly rosy about that outlook either. But I think we've also seen at least the wide receiver position that South Carolina has done a good job in the transfer portal every offseason at kind of filling holes. Antoine Wells came from the transfer portal. Corey Rucker did last year. We didn't get to see what he really could do, but by all means, that was a pretty good ad. I think he just got injured and it never quite materialized. Eddie Lewis this past offseason. You got other pass catchers like Trey Knox and Joshua Simon. So I think they're going to be okay there. And then you did add some quality wide receivers in the 2024 class with Mazio Bennett and Marion Lang. And we'll see, if someone arrives late like last year, Edwin Joseph. Yeah. Got added at the very end, in-state guy. And we've actually heard a lot of positive returns this offseason about his workouts and stuff as well. So that actually might end up being a steal there. So I think the wide receiver room is going to be fine. Is what I guess my overall point is. And I think in general we should feel pretty rosy about the recruiting. Also, I encourage you to check out GamecockScoop.com around 6 p.m. tonight. That's how I'll tease it, but we might have a little bit of a look ahead at how some of the coming classes 2025, 2026 are going to begin to play out as well as soon as tonight, which is crazy to say because that's a freshman in high school, or I guess about to be a sophomore in high school. But
comes quick.
You know when you know, yeah. All right, so the last thing I'll say about recruiting, as far as what you're getting in Dylan Stewart, I'm sure a lot of people have already broken this down. We broke this down on GamecockScoop.com the day after with a film study from Perry McCarty. From what I can tell, he's probably the best pure pass rusher that you've landed, assuming that you make it all the way to the finish line here, that you've landed maybe since Clowney. I know Birch was the highest rated since Clowney, and Birch was rated a little bit higher than Stewart is at this point. But Birch wasn't the same pure explosive athlete off the edge that Dylan Stewart is.
That's more the bull rush type.
Yeah, exactly. Dylan Stewart is spending some time in high school playing linebacker, playing inside and outside, and playing edge. And yeah, I mean, he's just a very quick guy for how giant he is. So I think that's going to end up being a really big addition at a position of need, which we've talked about a lot over the past offseason, really. That's all I got on recruiting right now. Like I said, you probably want to check out GamecockScoop.com around 6 p.m. tonight. That's all I'll say on that one. All right, let's get into some actual football, though. So yesterday was media days. I played that clip there at the beginning of the show of Beamer talking about the incoming freshmen. I know a lot of people probably have a lot of questions about who's going to make an impact in their first year. We have some obvious names like Nicholas Harbor, who we've talked a good bit about. As I said, Edwin Joseph has come along. We've talked about Lenoris Sellers. Let's start there, I guess. What did you pick up from yesterday, media day? What did you see at practice today as far as the freshmen? Anyone maybe taking on a role earlier than we might expect? Anyone come in, look college ready, even though they've only been out of high school a few months?
Yeah, I think the college ready thing is kind of the point there. It's such an eye test thing. You're watching 7 periods of practice that are all 4 to 6 minutes each, and one of them's a stretch and another one's just special teams coverage. So what are you actually seeing? You're more just looking at body type mainly. Pup Howard looks like a Division I SEC linebacker. Let's just start there. Nicholas Harbor, I know that kind of went around Twitter today as people posting pictures of him. Yeah, he looks like a Division I player. He looks like a 5-star. Xavier McLeod, he looks like a guy who can play in the SEC. You don't know what that's going to look like when they're taking snaps. You don't know what that's going to look like on the field, but it just looks bigger. Shane talked about that a little bit yesterday. He mentioned, I have a tidbit. I have a story in it on GamecockScoop.com. You're subscribed. Just kind of some takeaways from yesterday. And one of the things he said was that I believe it was 31 players who ran faster than they ever have before, in the time practice, and also that their average squat and bench press all up across the board. So You know what? That's summer talk. I got a quote from Clayton White where he basically said, everyone thinks they had a good summer. Everyone thinks they're doing well. Everyone's optimistic, and someone's going to go 2-10 and 1-11 because that's how college football works, which I thought was fair from Clayton. But also, I think there is a belief that there was a good summer here, at least from a physical standpoint. You see how that translates into actual football things.
Yeah, so I mean, that's not particularly surprising either, right? That we're going to start to see more impact from freshmen as Beamer and company have kind of gotten their recruiting in place. I just want to kind of give you a quick rundown of what the recruiting ranks have looked like since Beamer arrived. So the class of 2021 class, very small, hard to get that fully together, was 74th in the team rankings. 2022 moved up a good bit to 26th. And then this incoming freshman class last year, class of 2023, was the highest ranked of the Beamer era so far at 17th. We'll see if 2024 can exceed that. I think it should exceed that from an average star ranking perspective, but because you're not going to have the same number of total commitments, maybe not. But yeah, it's not surprising. Like, this was the highest rated class. It's not surprising to see more of those 4- and 5-star kids show up ready to play. Another name that stood out to me this morning, we saw Tosin Babalade, a big tree. We saw
second group left tackle.
Yeah, Trovon Ball, and we saw Marky Anderson all kind of working into that second group at O-line. And we know, because of the depth issues at O-line right now, that probably maybe all three of those guys, at least one of those three guys, is going to have to play some.
You're playing more than 5. I think it's almost non-negotiable at this point. That whatever first 5 you run out there for that first snap against North Carolina is not your 5 on the second drive, second week, third, whatever. It's just you're gonna have to play more than 5.
And then perhaps another name to target as far as the freshmen go. We've talked a little bit about DJ Braswell at running back, another position of need, but also Cameron Sandlin, who we hinted at, I think, in the spring or over the summer at some point. We had heard that he was getting some looks at running back. Seems like he's going to start there as his official position. He was brought in as a tight end. He played quarterback in high school, and he ran the ball a lot as a quarterback in high school. So, there's still a lot of room to mold him into a running back if that's what you're trying to do here. And I'm interested to see how that plays out, although he was practicing off to the side this morning.
Yeah, right? He was limited today. He a little bit injured. I mean, I don't want to speculate anything too much. It was him. Stone Blanton was off to the side on an exercise bike. Kawan Banks, saw Emery Floyd go off late. Just bumps and bruises, for lack of a better term, is kind of what it looked like. I wouldn't say I saw anybody today that I don't think can play week 1, except Jalen Nichols, obviously, but we already knew that. Just stuff to keep an eye on through camp. Remember this time last year we did the Kai Kroger thing because he missed practices. He wasn't hurt. We weren't sure if he was going to be healthy week 1.
Yeah, and another one to add to that list, Tyreek Johnson was practicing
in blue jersey.
Blue jersey, no contact jersey. Now on the positive front, we saw the return of Mo Kaba and Jordan Strahan, who both were practicing in full seemingly today.
Mm-hmm. No knee brace, or they're still wearing knee braces, but that's the first time we've seen them out there like doing stuff since last fall.
And one more positive injury note that I'm going to choose to take with a grain of salt, because we've kind of seen how this staff has handled injuries over the past few years, and it's not always they've had an optimistic view, I guess, of timelines and stuff. But allegedly yesterday, Jalen Nichols and some of the staff think that he could be back by mid-season-ish. We'll see if that comes to fruition. We know that he definitely
as optimistic on that either, but
yeah, we know that he definitely tore some things in the spring game. He had to have off-season surgery. It would be a pretty aggressive timeline to get back that soon, but maybe that would be great. They could definitely use him if he is feeling healthy by that point.
He said himself, we talked to him, that like his best case is a little bit after halfway through the year. Again, I think if you're talking about, what would that be, like week 8, week 9, that's still an aggressive timeline, and B, that still puts you out of 5, 6, 7 pretty important games on a front-loaded schedule. So take it wherever you want.
All right. You wrote an article yesterday called 10 Tidbits from South Carolina's Media Day. let's kind of go through a couple of those things real quick, and if you want to expand on anything. I think you already mentioned a little bit that Beamer was very high about the strength and conditioning program over the summer. He said that the average squat on the team went up 50 pounds, which is pretty impressive, especially like you're thinking. He said, these are veteran players too. It's not people that are just coming into a strength and conditioning program for the first time. We talked a bit about the offensive line. That's something that Beamer sort of mentioned is a big fall battle that he's looking for himself. I don't think we noted this morning. You kind of had a first team offensive line, but obviously that's very tentative. It was going against air. But we saw Sidney Fugar slotted in at right tackle, Ja'Kai Moore slotted in at left tackle. Who was at center again?
It was Vershawn Lee at center, and we had Gargiulo at left guard and Trey Jones at right guard.
Right. So not necessarily exactly how it's going to play out.
I will say, though, you say it's not how necessarily. I think there's a very good chance Vershawn's starting center. I think almost by default, Ja'Kai Moore's left tackle. He's the only player on the roster who's ever played left tackle at South Carolina. I think there's a very good chance you've got Gargiulo at left guard too. Just try to solidify at least one side of it. So maybe the right side still got questions. I know Tyshawn Wanamaker is definitely going to be in the mix at right tackle too. Yeah, but I don't know if that's as far off as maybe it thinks. I think honestly, maybe your question is who's lined up where specifically, and what does 6 through 8 look like as much as 1 through 5.
Yeah, and how much can you depend on the depth of that rotation? So hopefully some questions that will get answered before September 2nd, 3rd, 2nd. What else stood out to you from them running through some drills this morning? Do we know who our starting wide receiver group is? Do we know who our starting running back is going to be? Anything?
Do you know anything? No. It's August 4th, 29 days from kickoff. It was 7 periods of the first practice. Can you look at some things? We saw some 12 personnel. That was something I talked to Jody Wright about yesterday. There's a lot of tight ends here, and you got to figure out how that's going to work. Trey Knox listed as a tight end, maybe receiver, maybe we'll see how that goes. But Josh Simon, Nick Elksnis, you've got Connor Cox here, you've got Reed McKeksa here, the freshman from Texas. There's just a lot of tight ends here that are all going to have to figure out roles. And I do think there is a lot of 2 tight end stuff coming. There's a lot of different things you can do. You can have Knox and Simon out there together in an obvious passing down. I think Nick Elksnis is probably going to lean being towards more your blocking tight end type, short yardage situations. You've got the 2 freshmen there. That was kind of takeaway. We saw, again, they took snaps against air, but we saw 2 tight ends set in that situation. Then that also bounces back off things that we're talking about yesterday. So tight ends, keeping a look at that too.
So in that 2 tight end set, you're saying both were on the line?
Yeah, it was Simon and Elksnis in that one with the second team. It was Doty at quarterback. And then Trey, it was a 1 tight end on the first team. It was Trey Knox.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, I was going back and watching some of the last few games of the season. I watched the Tennessee game, the Clemson game, and the Notre Dame game in the last couple of weeks just to kind of see what had changed in the offense, see what things might carry over. And one of the biggest things that stood out to me from those rewatches was Nate Atkins and the way that they were moving him around. They put him in the backfield a lot, brought him in as an extra blocker, which I think opened up a little bit more time for Spencer Rattler to sit back there and start to pick apart secondaries. So I do think, especially with this O-line that's a little bit shaky, you might see some tight ends even used creatively like that to brought into the backfield to pick up a blocker or to create an extra blocker, I guess. So.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily a like for like, 1-for-1 thing. I think there's obviously different skill sets, but if you maybe had to do it that way last year to this year, okay, Trey Knox is the Jaheim Bell. That's the playmaker. That's the vertical threat. Josh Simon's the Stogner. Maybe that's more of a red zone thing. Also some blocking. And Elksnis is probably more than Nate Atkins, if you kind of had to do it that way. I don't necessarily know if it's going to play out that way exactly, but that's the closest comp, I guess. You're just trying to take last year's apples to this year's apples.
Another thing that we were discussing this morning was you said that the linebacker group kind of stood out to you as a group that is looking a lot different from last year. It's something that we've targeted a little bit this offseason as I think a potential strength of the defense. And again, not taking anything away from the two six-year seniors last year, but through injuries and just, ability or whatever, it's possible that you're going to have more talent in that linebacker room this year. But obviously, you're giving away some of that veteran insight or whatever that you had last year.
I almost think that's a microcosm for this roster in general as a linebacker room, is just the more talented, less experienced. I think you're going to see that in a lot of positions. I think you probably have more raw offensive line talent, less experience, linebacker for sure. I think maybe even an edge, although maybe that might take another recruiting class. A more talent, less experience. I do think there is assuming Stone Blanton's healthy, assuming Mo Kaba can get up to game speed. He told me he was about 85% yesterday when we talked. Addition by subtraction almost. I don't mean that as a shot at Brad or Sherrod, but Pop Howard looks the part. He's been here since December. He was in Gator Bowl practices. Stone Blanton looked the part, especially in run stopping at different points last year. Debo Williams he looks bigger too. He looks ready. He's a senior now. That's kind of your leadership left. Mo Kaba was a starter last year before the injuries. I think this is a better linebacker room, and you're just going to have to live with some mistakes now and then, especially from Stone and Pup as the younger guys there, and it's just going to happen.
And that's not even to mention Jerron Willis, who is a transfer from Auburn. Didn't play a ton of Auburn, but he was a 4-star as he entered Auburn, and he's a true sophomore, I believe, or maybe even a redshirt freshman.
Yeah,
I would have to look that up again. But so you definitely have some young talent to go along with Mo Kaba and Debo Williams, who have kind of been there and seen it a little bit. I think that's one of your key questions heading into this season is, can you stop the run? I actually looked back statistically at the run defense for South Carolina last year. Guess where they finished in rush yards per game given up.
I know it starts with a 1 and not number 1 or number 10. Is it like 117 or something? I feel like I might have looked at this during media days.
That's actually exactly what it was, 117th. That is not good. I don't think that you can have a repeat performance of that and have the sort of season that you want to have. So, I mean, and like we said, you're thin at edge. Maybe with the way that you shuffle things around, you end up better at holding the edge, at least in the run game, while giving up a little bit of pass rush off the edge with speed or whatever. But I actually think maybe you make that trade-off because you just trust your DBs to be able to cover back there and stop the run a little bit more. And I think you still probably come out better in that situation. Probably force more third downs, third and longs, and get off the field a little bit more than they did last season. Because, I think it's easy to remember how the season ended on such a high note. But there was several times where they literally just could not get off the field on third down last year, and probably gave away a couple games that they should have won. I mean, including the Gator Bowl. Really, like you go back and Logan Diggs and Estime, they carried Notre Dame to that back and forth sort of when South Carolina had several opportunities to put it away if they could just make one stop. So. That's going to be key, I think. Other tidbits from yesterday. We didn't mention this when we were talking about the freshmen, but I thought it was interesting. We've already seen this staff do a really good job at identifying in-state talent that might be a little bit underrated, under the radar, and then they show up on campus and blow up. We saw this with Nick Emenwari. We saw this with DQ Smith. I'm not saying that Judge Collier is going to necessarily live up to those levels of expectation. I mean, Nick Emenwari is on the preseason Nagurski list or whatever as a true sophomore. Like he has exceeded all expectations at this point. But Judge Collier has already gained 20 pounds of muscle, he said yesterday at the media days, which he was a little bit not undersized. He's plenty tall enough, but he was a late bloomer when he gained his height, and he was a little bit, thin, but now that he's filled out some, I could definitely see him. I don't know about contributing this year, but contributing long-term to that DB room.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of people you talked to yesterday. I asked a lot of people, what's different about you? Where are you now versus where your game was 12 months ago? And you get mixed answers from people, and got a very straightforward answer from Judge Collier, which stuck out to me, and it's kind of why I wrote about it a little bit. Just that, yeah, I'm 20 pounds stronger now. That was very point blank from him. It was 180 when I got here. I'm 200 now. I'm stronger. What does that mean for playing football this year? I don't know. I still feel like you're pretty good at corner right now. That was actually one position, Shane was asked yesterday about what he needs to see from people or what positions he needs to kind of still learn about in camp. And he said, we've got our top two corners. We need to know who's number three. The fact that you have your top two corners set with Marcellus Dial and O'Donnell Fortune, you're in pretty good shape there. There's not a lot of teams that can say that for sure. But what does the rest of that room look like? Obviously, you play a 4-2-5. You're going to need a nickel back. Is that where David Spalding comes in? Maybe. But I do think there's still snaps up for grabs there, especially because the secondary was banged up last year a lot. And they want guys that can play safety, nickel, and corner that can rotate. And there will be snaps up for grabs for freshmen in that room.
Yeah, and I think Marcellus Dial and David Spalding both are guys that have been around for a bit. You probably heard their names some, but they probably got overlooked by the two NFL draft picks last year. But I think they're going to slot in and do just fine. And O'Donnell Fortune as well. Another interesting thing is your top 4 starting DBs are all from the state of South Carolina, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if that factors in as far as motivation or whatever, but the back end, I think you feel good about. The question is, can you stop the run? Can you create a little bit of a pass rush? We'll have to see. It's going to be tested almost immediately, especially the pass rush.
Yeah, then we're going to talk about that more, I'm sure, that week. But if you give Drake May time to pick you apart, he's going to. They're going to have to find a way to get some pressure too. Also, middle of that defensive line. You got a new coach there, Travian Robertson. Saw him out there today. You just lost an NFL day 2 pick there with Zach Pickens, a guy who's been in this program for a long time. What's the replacement looking like there? I know you're not going to replace Zach Pickens, but you're between Tonka Hemingway, Boogie Huntley, maybe some of these freshmen, Xavier McLeod, Elijah Davis. Where do those snaps come from? You're losing MJ Webb, too, who played quite a bit last year. Where do the snaps come from? How are you making up the math there? I think is another question.
And we both talked back in the spring that Elijah Davis was someone that flashed a lot in the spring, has pretty high expectations coming out of JUCO, already has the body of a junior. So he's ready for the SEC load a little bit, I think. I think that interior rotation is going to be okay. The question is, what do you do at edge? Can you get some of those young guys to come along fast enough?
Do you feel good about the young guys inside that you can kick Tonka outside?
Right. Or Elijah Davis, who we saw play a little bit on the outside in the spring as well. Yeah, I mean, you still have Xavier McLeod, highly rated. Is he big enough yet, ready to take on a SEC offensive line? I don't know. Maybe you can work him in for a few snaps a game if you have a particular passing situation or something where you need to throw some experience in at edge. That'll be interesting to see. Another thing that we saw today was the wide receivers sort of line up in their first groups. And I also saw in your media tidbits yesterday that the wide receivers got talked about a little bit. We know that the 3 returners, Amarian Brown, Xavier Legette, and Juice Wells are pretty much slotted in as starters, going to get plenty of snaps, whatever. The question is, who is next in line? A name that we've heard a lot and that you actually saw line up with the ones today, although he lined up in Juice's spot, which is obviously not going to happen against UNC. But we heard a lot in bowl prep, a lot in the spring. Omega Blake, another in-state guy out of Rock Hill. I believe he's a rising junior. Hasn't done a ton throughout his career thus far, but maybe he's kind of taken that next step and can work into that rotation. And then you have Eddie Lewis, who came in here from Memphis as a transfer. He might factor into punt return and also into like that Josh Van sort of role on the offense. Anything else you saw with that group?
You saw Peyton Mangrum get in with the twos there. That's the walk-on who was put on scholarship last season, played a little bit down the stretch, some in the bowl game, a lot on special teams still, but that's another guy I think they might be able to catch passes there. That was about it on that front. I think what's really kind of interesting is your target share between tight ends and wide receivers and how that looks this year. Because yes, you feel good at wide receiver. You have Juice back. That's your game breaker. You've got Leggett back. He's been here a while. Marion Brown, they did a lot with last year, just kind of in the passing game. But your tight end room's loaded too. And you at least feel, at least one of those guys in Knox is a bona fide SEC playmaker from his time in Arkansas. So what does that share look like? Kind of how are you splitting up targets? I'm almost as interested as that as much as I am the receiver depth chart, because I think a lot of these tight ends are going to end up being passing game weapons as much as anything, or even as much as these receivers are.
Yeah, and you have to replace the production of Jalen Brooks and Josh Van. Yep. I do think Xavier Leggett could take a step forward. We saw a little bit of that at the end of the season.
The Gator Bowl, yeah.
An absolutely ridiculous catch in the Gator Bowl where he kind of caught it in the back of the end zone, got his foot down. He had a couple of touchdowns in the Gator Bowl. We saw in the kick return game him return at 100 yards versus Texas A&M, break a couple of tackles, outrun everyone. So he seems to have the skill set. It's can he put it all together and be someone that Spencer Rattler relies on consistently on a game in and game out basis. If he can become that, and then you have Amari, you have Juice Wells as your one, I think you're feeling pretty good, especially with that tight end room. If he doesn't, then someone else is going to have to step up and kind of be that reliable option, because we know that people are going to blanket Juice Wells.
That's the big question this year. It's kind of the all right, Juice Wells isn't going to sneak up on anybody this year. Maybe that was an unknown commodity last year. Maybe, I don't know, caught some teams by surprise isn't the right word, but he's the guy this year. He's the one. He's going to see the other team's best cornerback most weeks, I would assume. Where does that look like elsewhere? What does that mean elsewhere? Who does that open things up for, I think is probably your question.
Yeah. And then as far as running back goes, we've talked a lot about it, but it seems like all signs at this point are pointing to DeCarry Joyner potentially
going with the ones again today. Look bigger. Yeah, I don't know that's going to work, but they seem all in on that. The chips are in the middle of the table, and they have been since March, to be fair.
Yeah, and then obviously you have Mario Anderson working into that rotation, and then Juju McDowell, who's more of a change of pace guy, but he's obviously going to get a few touches a game. As he has since a freshman, because he can make some electric things happen if he gets a little bit of space. I don't think you have to do a ton in that run game, except for just keep teams honest. Keep teams where they can't just pin their ears back and rush the passer on every single play. If you can do enough, I'm saying like 100 to 120 yards a game. Like combined,
that's
even
still a big ask, though. I think that's still a big ask with this group, though. What you're looking at right now.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough, but I think you're gonna have to find a way to piece that together. And they're doing everything they can, right? You have your gadget quarterback, wide receiver that has gone all in to become a running back. You have Cameron Sandlin, who they wanted to put a tight end, but they're slotting back there. You're taking your athletes on the team and putting them back there and hoping something good happens. And maybe it will. It won't surprise me if it works out.
That's going to be scheming as much as anything. That's what Dowell will draw up to keep defenses honest. How does that look on Montario Hardesty's end? That is going to come down to just what you can do almost in the film room week just to open. Because you're still working at a talent deficit at running back to what you had last year with Marshawn Lloyd there, with Christian Beal-Smith. But can you scheme it together? Can you make it work? Can you make it work? It goes back to what you just said. Can you make it work just enough to keep the pressure off Spencer to, if you get the ball back up 6 with 4 minutes left, to finish out a game? That's the question.
Right. Well, and I think we did see across those last 3 games where they had their most offensive success of the season, you were pretty limited on your options at running back. Lloyd was hurt a lot of those games. You had Jaheim Bell back there running a good bit. Christian Beal-Smith was hurt a lot of that time. Lloyd transferred out before the bowl game. You had Juju McDowell and Jaheim Bell, and that was kind of it at running back. So we've seen them be creative and it work enough, which I think, should make you feel at least somewhat confident going into the season. But you got to keep defenses honest, because the second you play a decent defensive line with a decent pass rush, and you can't run the ball at all, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, I think.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's coming week one, but it's definitely coming once you get into the SEC schedule and you're looking at that first SEC game specifically. It's going to have to come together quick.
All right, I think that's about all I had. Did you have anything else that we didn't hit on from the last couple of days?
No, I think that's about what we have from practice today, from media day yesterday. We're back into it. It's we're 4 weeks from tomorrow. If you want to count week 0, if you guys are excited about Vanderbilt and Hawaii, we're 3 weeks from college football tomorrow.
I actually did have one more thing. Something kind of interesting I thought from the press release put out by the university after practice today. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to read the direct quote, and then we can discuss it here for a second as our last thing. So they got Beamer coming off the practice field talking about how it went. And he said, "It was great to be back here on day one. There was a lot of energy, a lot of excitement, and a lot of youth. I thought we did some good things. The biggest concern is our ability to maintain as the practice goes. I thought one side of the ball defensively got better as the day went, and the other side kind of allowed fatigue to set in a little bit. I know we're in shape. We have to be better. But I like the workman-like attitude. We just have to continue to build that mental toughness." So is that just like coach speak, trying to motivate your team in the press? I mean, they didn't even have to put out anything today, right? No. Or is that something that you think might be a legitimate concern? And did you read that as he's saying like the second group defense was lagging, or that defensively they were fine, but offensively they were lagging?
I read it that way personally. I read that because he doesn't use the word we're picking apart a university approves practice quote here, but
hey, it's day one. We gotta
he doesn't
start to
he doesn't use the word first team there. He says one side of the ball, as in right. To me that means defense and not offense. Which we heard some last year too. At this time, the defense is ahead of the offense, and I think that's to be expected, especially when you're still working through a new system too. I got some notes on the offensive install from a story last week. If you're subscribed, that's I guess how I would take that the defense is ahead of the offense right now. I mean that's
just
pretty much what I got.
Just a coach speak from day one sort of thing.
Probably,
yeah. I don't think that anyone should read too much into that and be overly concerned that there's a bunch of people that are being lazy or not putting forth effort or anything like that. But yeah, maybe he is trying to motivate certain individuals. And we've talked kind of about all of the turnover on defense, whereas the offense is at least somewhat more solidified from last year to this year. So it could be as much as just like reminding the veterans, like, hey, no, you still got to give effort. Just because you're not, just because you feel like your position sort of solidified, you still have to go at it. This month is going to be very important. You don't get a warm-up game. You got to be ready to go and firing on all cylinders in about 28 days.
Yeah, and then just giving you guys a little bit of a look at kind of where this goes from here. Obviously, they're going to keep practicing. The next practice is tomorrow. Media's not coming to that. Next open practice is 6 periods, so we're losing a period on Monday afternoon. Couple media availabilities with players next week, and then they're playing a closed scrimmage at Williams-Brice next week that we can talk to Beamer after. We obviously can't watch. That'll be the staff's first chance to see something resembling a game from these players. And after that, you're about halfway through camp and you're within 2 weeks of the opener. So that's kind of what this looks like the next week or so, just for you guys out there.
Yep. And anytime we're allowed to be there, we will be there and have some live updates for you on GamecockScoop.com and some follow-up. We'll try to piece together those closed scrimmages as best we can through what we hear afterwards, what we hear from whatever sources we can find, and try to get that to you. But in the meantime, just be excited. It's back. Football season's here. We will be back here next week around Thursday or Friday to talk about everything that's happened. And yeah, one more time, just a little teaser to check out GamecockScoop.com around 6 p.m. tonight. I think you'll enjoy what you see. Until next time, this has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. We'll see you later.